what your purpose is, understanding your purpose, discovering, exploring, and ultimately embodying and fulfilling your purpose, that is the most important pursuit in life, because everything else you do is informed by that understanding of yourself. What are you here to do? I've just found that if I'm feeling fear about doing something, then that's usually a sign that that's the direction to go. To walk into it, to lean into it. It's never easy to do, but at least I know that at this point about myself, that, ooh, that feeling, I know that feeling, and go towards that. I just started to feel like, we're really leaving out a lot of people. And how did that happen? Like, what is it about the way that yoga is marketed? What is it about the way that we're all running the business of it that is excluding people, It's unconscious. Nobody's trying to do that, but that's kind of what had happened.
With over 20 years of experience in teaching yoga and mindfulness, we have Rutu Chaudhuri on the podcast with us today. She was named Best Yoga Teacher in Atlanta by Creative Loafing in 2017. Rutu is a Civic Innovation Fellow, a recipient of the United Way of Greater Atlanta's Spark Prize, and investment recipient from Spanx founder Sarah Blakely for her work. Her life's work centers around yoga and mindfulness. Rutu is the founder of the Dharma Project and owner of All Life is Yoga studio space in Atlanta, Georgia. And she's also a producer and actress.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Rutu. Thank you. Thanks for having me. So we just want our audience to be able to get to know you a little bit. And I just wanted to ask you to just tell us a little bit of what it was like growing up as an Indian American and how you ended up in Atlanta, Georgia. So we moved here when I was about 5 years old. We moved to Pennsylvania, which everybody knows now because of Joe Biden and The Office. And then from Pennsylvania, we moved to New Jersey. And from Jersey City, we moved to Snellville, Georgia. So those were the big transitions in my life. And I would say that, Pennsylvania is a strange, like Scranton particularly, is an interesting place for immigrants to end up because it's actually very diverse. There was a lot of factories and a lot of opportunities for immigrants. So that's how we ended up there. We moved to New Jersey after like 5 years of living in Scranton. My father had a lot of friends and we had a lot of Indian community in New Jersey. A lot of Indians live in Jersey. So that was very comfortable and familiar place. And then we moved to Snellville, Georgia. My father had an opportunity to start a business of his own. Georgia was this booming place at the time in the 90s. There was just a lot of opportunity to start businesses for entrepreneurs. So we came down south for that. It must have been really different, like going from Jersey to Snellville, Georgia. It was. The cool thing about New Jersey for us was that, there's just so many different cultures in school and in the neighborhood. So everyone's making fun of everyone. And so it felt very inclusive in that way. Like, even though I remember like racial slurs that were said to me when I was in high school or even in middle school in New Jersey, it's just, we were all doing it to each other, so in some way that was less harsh for me than moving to Snellville, Georgia, where we were like a handful of minorities at the school. And the things that we experienced felt very directed at us as opposed to like, this is just what kids do and everybody's doing it. So it was a bit more challenging. It was definitely the most traumatic transition I had. Even from moving from India to the US felt less difficult than the transition from the north to the south, particularly because I was in the middle of high school when we made that shift, Yeah. I think my sister at the time moved, I want to say sophomore or junior year. And it was definitely like a tough transition. Even moving different school districts.
Schools, yeah.
Yeah. So I can't imagine, moving from one state with like culture and friends that you're familiar with and then coming down to Georgia.
Particularly when we moved to the South, because in the North, my father and my parents, they felt comfortable with us being out and engaged in the world, because we were surrounded by Indians and there was that familiarity and comfort for that. When we moved to the South, the other thing that we experienced was that our parents kind of had a freak out moment of like, oh my God, we don't know who these kids, who the kids are and what their cultures are and how our kids are going to be influenced by that culture. And my parents became very strict during that time. They kind of sheltered us. They, wouldn't let us have friends and go out and things like that. So I wanted to also say there's the component of how an individual experiences the world outside of them. And then it's also navigating family life, and like the expectation that we will be traditional Indians at home, and in this new world. There's just, my parents also didn't know what it would be like to be in a new country. So they were gripping to what they understood as culture for them and how they wanted their kids to be raised, and bringing those traditions into a new place, new land. For us, we're like kind of just going back and forth, like trying to be American, trying to assimilate, trying not to be Indian as much as possible so we can fit in school, and then at home having to be, very much Indian. So I think it's interesting when people say, oh, you came here when you were 5 years old. You're so Americanized, It's like, well, what does that mean? Like, I had to also be very Indian, and I there's no escaping that, so that notion of being Americanized, I find to be very unusual and never really fit that. Whenever someone says that, it's almost like a rejection or dismissal of the Indian part of me,
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah.
So being an immigrant there's just a lot to navigate,
I feel like I could definitely relate to that within like having two different identities and neither culture like fully like claims you, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you just end up really different from both cultures. So like
Yeah.
not fitting in with traditional Koreans and not fully being American.
Yeah. I mean, when I go to India, I'm definitely not like Indian, or even in, like you said, like groups that, of Indians in the US that were very tight knit. Like it was hard to feel like I was included by Indians as well. And then I was trying so hard to not be Indian, like to not have any accents or like traditional things that would show up. So yeah, it's just a feeling of rejection in every direction. Which is, in some ways, it can be a real blessing,
Can you expand a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think yoga has been this practice and journey of figuring out what home is, like how do I feel welcome and at place? Like I have a place. And when so many things outside of you don't really make you feel like you're welcome, and even home sometimes, I mean, there was a lot of challenges at home, like a lot of family trauma and violence and things like that. So like home wasn't necessarily the safe place either for me. So there's just a journey of like seeking home, trying to figure out what that means. And ultimately through the practice of yoga, recognizing that like my body is my home, and this wherever I am is home. And place is what you create for yourself, Yeah.
That's an incredibly powerful realization. I feel like it must have been such a journey to get to that point where you can feel at home within yourself. Before we get into talking about like your practice and how that's changed your life, I wanted to ask you, what was the journey like in finding community, you said the transition moving here was one of the hardest. What was that experience like? Were you able to eventually find community here? Yeah, I mean, I eventually moved to Atlanta and I was involved in a lot of counterculture, even in high school. Like I was drawn to the sort of rebellious weirdo kids, at the high school where I felt very accepted. And so I felt like I did have a few friends that not necessarily understood me, but like accepted me.
Mhm.
And then in college, similar, like, when I was in high school, I started sneaking out and going to raves and like
Mhm.
these late night, all night dance parties,
Mhm.
where it just didn't matter who I was. And like it was so much about freedom of expression.
Mhm.
So I think I found a community there. I found community in hip hop. I became very immersed in the culture of hip hop when I was in late high school and college, and still now. And I think hip hop is very much a conversation about exclusion and finding yourself when there's so much that oppresses you. That's, around you. There's so many things that are telling you what you are and who you aren't and where you belong. And hip hop is this way of claiming your place through creative expression, and through community. So, yeah, there were definitely things that I found I sought out in college, even just like feminist thinking and just trying to understand and navigate being a woman and being a
Yeah.
woman of color and all of that. So, um, I was always very curious, and I feel like I sought out those that understood what it meant to be separate, or not know where you belong. And I was really blessed to find community in a lot of different ways. And, I think that also being an immigrant in some ways has allowed me to adapt to not necessarily feeling at home and finding myself and finding my place. I feel like I'm just now very able to adapt to different environments, wherever I am. I find some way of connecting to people.
Mhm.
So, were you going to say something, Liz? Sorry.
Oh yeah, I just love that you throughout, your journey, you really embraced exploring different parts of your identity. So not just your cultural identity, your ethnicity, but like your creative interests, through hip hop, through yoga, and just through, different groups at school. I just love that you are tuned to that. Um, that you have these different parts of yourself that you seem to explore really deeply. So I just appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was all very unconscious, I think, in a lot of ways. Like it's all now in retrospect, it's like, oh, that's what was going on.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. The journey of yoga is also very interesting for me because there was so much rejection of Indian culture, particularly like, especially when I came to the South. I just felt like I had to, you know, really become more like neutral or unseen or something. Like I don't know how to explain it, but there's this like I have to sort of dim myself to fit in. Um, and so the 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 fact that I even found myself to yoga, because I had rejected Hinduism and like a lot of cultural things when I was a high school student as a way of surviving, I think, and also as a way of rebelling against what I thought at the time was these contradictions I was seeing in my parents' behavior versus their faith. So I was having a lot of conflict around what it meant to be Indian and what it meant to be a Hindu at the time. And though yoga is not at all connected to the Hindu religion, um, I found it interesting that I leaned into yoga. Initially I rejected yoga when I first was exposed to yoga. I was like, this is not for me in particular. And that was maybe because also the way that it was presented, it was like new age music and like it was just like this is not this is not even part of my culture anyway. And I I just didn't want to get too involved in anything that was too Indian as well, which is kind of weird to think about. But I mean, I went through a similar experience with just like my own culture and not really like I wanted to everything to do with being American. And then it wasn't
Hmm.
until like probably early 20s and onward where I started being curious again about my
Yeah.
country. But yeah, it took a long time for me to get to that point. Because I was like
Yeah.
just rejecting it for so long.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's how I feel about yoga is like I had to just, reject everything I was rejecting so many things about being Indian for so long. And the things that really were valuable or mattered found their way back.
Mhm. So can we talk about how you discovered, I guess, rediscovered yoga? Because it sounds like you had experienced it and it didn't really click for you then. But can we talk about what that rediscovery was like and what was the experience that drew you to yoga?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, school life and family life were really tough when I was in high school. By the time I got to college, I was pretty depressed and a lot of anxiety. Um, I was not necessarily managing it in the healthiest ways, like going out to late night parties and getting involved with drugs and things like that. I was doing a lot of escaping. Uh, And so I was interested in yoga. There was some part of me that was so curious about it. And so I had gone to a class at my school at the time at the University, Georgia State. And I like walked out in the middle of the class because I was like, oh God, this is too, it didn't feel right. Something about it just felt like such a contrived version of this really deep and meaningful part of my life and my culture. And there was someone presenting it in a way that felt like very artificial to me. And I'm not saying they were being artificial, but it just felt it just felt uncomfortable for whatever reason at the time. And I was like, I couldn't do it. I gotta get out of here. And then a friend of mine, actually, a white woman, she ended up taking a yoga teacher training, and we weren't even friends, we were colleagues at the time. And she was like, hey, I just graduated, I'm going to be doing this free class. And she's like, you should come. And that's when I decided to go. It was a familiar person. I felt like I could, um like I felt like I knew the person enough to trust them to go. And literally the first class that I ever took with her, I had like the most incredible change in myself, like almost instantly. Those first, I think it was like a 60-minute class. And I left that class being like, what just happened? Like I felt so good in my physical body. And now when I think back to what was going on, is that I had so dissociated from my body. I was so disconnected from my body. And I really struggled with being a woman when I was in college. Like I'd shave my head. I used to wear super baggy clothes. I didn't want to be seen. My body was just so alien to me. And the way that other people looked at my body was difficult for me to manage for whatever reason. I just wanted to hide all the time. And I had isolated a lot during college, and all of that, like the depression and all of that, was just at a strong place, and when yoga sort of came into my life. And in that moment, in that instant of doing the practice, I just felt like the first time I felt like a glimmer of what I now understand to be a feeling of love for my body, and for myself. At the time, I didn't know what it was. I was just like, whatever that feeling is I just had, I want more of that. Um, And I was really lucky to have that instantly, like from the moment I really did it, to have that experience of like, oh, this is like somehow connecting me to
a very positive version of myself. And so I wanted more. And so I just started to take her class. I started to bring a little tape recorder into the class, and I would tape her classes so I could do them at home. Um, I was reading and watching videos. I was just like trying to learn as much as I could. For about 3 years, I couldn't leave my house without having done my yoga practice. It was the only way I knew how to be in my body and like actually have authentic relations with the world around me, and like relax into myself and let other people in, you know? So it was very much a therapy experience of self therapy. And it was like I was medicating myself with meditation, you know?
Wow.
It's a healthy form of medication.
Oh my gosh. You know, I was very lucky to have found this thing that was like really working. And all of a sudden, every time I did it, I was just feeling more and more like I was peeling off and shedding all this trauma, you know, and shedding all this armor, and actually letting myself experience my own self and experience the world. So, yeah.
That's an incredibly powerful experience. How did it transition into, okay, I've experienced this amazing thing where it's like I've reconnected with my body for the first time? How did that translate into, I want to teach yoga?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to go deeper. I wanted to learn more, and a teacher training. Actually, interestingly enough, after I finished college, and I was already doing yoga at this point, I finished college, I decided I was going to move to India and like go live in India. So I had an open ticket, and I thought I was going to go create this life in my homeland. Tired of all this rejection and like feeling not at home. I'm going home.
Mhm.
So I went to India, and I was like, oh, this isn't home. People were like treated me differently and like made fun of me a different way. You know, it was just such a feeling of rejection that I came back after 6 months, and I did not know what I was going to do with my life. It was like this dismal moment. I had a degree in literature, and I thought I was going to go to film school, but then like didn't make it into the school I wanted to go to. So I just like gave up. And my sister was like, you love yoga. Why don't you teach yoga? And I was like, what? Teach yoga? Like, I'm not a guru. Like, I don't have the wisdom and knowledge to impart this on someone else, you know? So anyway, I took it too seriously. I decided, all right, well, I'll go and take a training and just learn more, go deeper in my practice. And I think within the first like week I was in training, I was already like wanting other people to experience it. And I think I always wanted to. As soon as I started doing yoga, I was like telling my family about it. And I was like, you guys should try this. And that just grew. The desire to share something that works, you know, or at least that was my experience, is I wanted to share something that was working for me and helping me feel better with others. And that desire to share just grew. It continued to grow. And the more I learned through education of how to teach and this philosophy, then I just was drawn to it more. But it almost felt like so seamless, you know, like, yeah, the whole journey with yoga it's felt seamless. Like it felt so easy always, you know, even though I'm like working on myself and working through and churning and processing all these difficult parts of myself and my life. And I still am. Like as I evolve and grow, yoga just continues to teach me how to confront myself, you know, and be honest with myself. So it's just always been challenging, but also extremely easy and natural. So in the middle of my teacher training, I got a teaching opportunity and I started sharing yoga. And then I got fired from my restaurant job. So it just became, well, I guess I'll just teach yoga full time. And that's what I did. Well, like, what a great blessing. I lost my job and I just decided to make yoga the thing, and I just became a major hustler after that point. So pretty much after college, I started teaching yoga, and that's all I've done for the past 22 years. Yeah.
Wow. I think life has a funny way of, when you're on the right path, things start to just align and click into place. And I think yoga has definitely been that. And I think you're right where you needed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about All Life is Yoga? We touched on that just briefly. I would love for our audience to hear a little bit about what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure. So like I said, I started teaching. I taught all around the city. Like I taught at studios, I taught at gyms, I taught at churches, wherever I could get a job. I mean, I remember I used to ride my bike. I didn't have a car for a while, so I would ride my bike and take a bus to Roswell
Oh, wow.
to like go teach a class where I got paid $8. So it was like a
Oh my gosh.
3-hour journey but it was like everything was a yes, at that time. Like I just wanted to do it, and it didn't really matter. I mean, money mattered, but it wasn't an obstacle to like doing the thing, So I just took every opportunity I got. I like way burned myself out by teaching too much for a while. But I did that for a long time. I guess I started teaching in 2003, and I opened All Life is Yoga in 2011. So for a long time, I was just teaching all over town. And eventually I got, I'd moved away. I went to go study yoga with a teacher in Washington for a couple of years and just deep dived. And then when I came back to Atlanta, that was like the next move, I guess, was to open up a space and like, rather than going all around town, which can be very exhausting, draw those that are interested in what I'm doing to the space, So I opened up the studio, didn't know really much about running a business. Never took any business classes. So that's been such an interesting experience to learn how to manage a brick and mortar. And, for a while I was managing a bunch of teachers and a brand, and yeah.
And how was like this, I guess, pursuit of yoga? How did this translate to like your parents? Like, I'm just curious, like coming from, you know, immigrant family, how was it like saying like, I'm going to pursue this unconventional path? How was that received?
Not well. If you can imagine, like, you would not think that your Indian parents would reject you wanting to teach yoga, given that it's got such a deep heritage, in our country. But no, my parents wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or a pharmacist, very traditional, like, we're here to get our kids well educated, give them opportunities so they can make money, lots of money. That's like really was on their mind. And at the time I didn't appreciate it. I was like, nope, I'm going to do what I want to do. I want to pursue the arts. I'm going to study literature, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I don't care about money, That's where I was coming from, the mentality that I just wanted to do good work and make art. So yeah, no, they didn't really love what I was doing. It's actually taken them a long time to be proud of me, I think. I don't think I've really heard my parents, my mother in particular, because I have a closer relationship with her, but she wasn't really proud of my work until I would say the last 5-6 years, you know? So yeah, for the longest time, I definitely felt like I was disappointing my parents. I still feel that way. I don't know if that's ever going to go away.
It's
But
funny
at
because
least
they went like an unconventional route too. Like they're
they
entrepreneurs, right?
Well, they're not. My parents, okay. One of the things that's amazing about my parents, that I love about my parents, that I feel like has informed and influenced me so much, is my parents are from two different castes. So we're from a really small town in India, and they're even smaller villages. My mother is the first person in her entire samaj, like her community, to go against the caste system. Like she was the first person to marry outside of her caste. So, and my mom's family was very reputable. Like they had, they're well known. Like my grandfather had a very mayor-ish like position in the community. So they came from a lot of respect, middle class, educated family. And my dad was from a lower caste, and also kind of not well educated, broken family, broken in the sense that their father died, and my grandmother raised like 7 kids by herself in poverty, essentially. So they were from very different lifestyles, and most importantly, very different from different bloodlines. So the fact that they broke tradition and convention in their small town, it was a really big deal. It was an extremely courageous and rebellious move that they made. And then to find themselves in another country, like have an opportunity to come to another country, like the courage that takes, the bravery that takes, the resilience and will, it takes to not speak a language, not have a full education and do something like this. Pretty remarkable, like admirable behavior, very strong work ethic my parents have. So yeah, and then to be entrepreneurs in a new country, I just feel like I've had like some amazing training, for being an entrepreneur, for unconventional behavior, rebelling, for the fact that I'm so interested and invested in justice and social justice and like equity and all of those things. They come from my parents, even though they're not really thrilled about it. It's funny because my parents used to say to me, okay, like when it's time, you have to marry a Chaudhuri. And so they were like expecting me to marry in the caste, which the irony of that, so they've definitely, it's just interesting because they don't see a lot of the behavior as rebellious behavior, that it's coming from them, but they are the seed of that kind of, fire that we all have. All 3 of us have. I mean, we all pursued the arts, all 3 siblings. None of us went that conventional route. So
Wow.
it's their fault.
They're like, where is this all coming from? It's like,
right. It's like, are you serious? Like, dude, look at your life.
Look at your life. Oh man. So would you say that your mom is your role model? Like, I'm curious, like
yes.
who? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
I would say my mom is my role model, not only because like she eloped and, she's got all this courage. She's always been such a hard worker. My mom, like when we used to live in New Jersey, she was always like taking courses to learn like computer stuff. She always wanted to, like, she worked at a factory to start with. And she was always like learning new skills so she can do a better job that would earn her more money. And, it's just amazing to watch her journey of like, I mean, she's the bravest one, I think, from the family. Like a lot of these things around believing that we could make it comes from her own willpower. So yeah, she's just a strong person. She's incredibly smart and wants to learn and is curious about the world and, is always learning new things. She's also extremely creative, particularly with food, with my mother. She just loves, when I was growing up, she also loved making like quilts and things. Like she was always making craft things, but then her relationship to food and the joy that she wants to share and the love that she wants to share and the creativity of trying new things, like when we were kids, a lot of the spices and things weren't necessarily available in the US at the time. So she was finding alternative ways to make the things, using what was available in the US. So I love all those things about her. She's like one of the most like forgiving and generous and kind people that I've ever met. And I think her kindness and her ability to forgive others has been like maybe some of the greatest lessons for me, at least right now, like as I'm getting older and seeing, relationships and the choices I've made and some of the mistakes I've made and things like that. And some of the resentments that build up in time, like I've really leaned on her, or just not even like dialogue with her, but just watching her, she is, the way that people have treated her through her life and how she just she doesn't hold on to things, and she still lets people in and forgives people. And it's incredible, that generosity that she has with people. Um, yeah, it's kind of one of the most important things I'm learning, uh, how she leaves people feeling, Mhm.
Yeah, I would say like just from meeting your mom, I can attest that she's just like such like a light in any room that she walks into. And I
Yeah,
definitely think I could see a lot of her qualities coming from you, or your qualities coming from her.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
I would hope so. That would be the biggest compliment, to feel like people are like, you are like your mom. Like, I feel like I have a long way to go to, you know, measure up to that.
Have you shared your yoga practice with your mom and like your siblings? Because a lot of times, when we experience something just really amazing and good, like we want our siblings or our family to experience that same change. Have you been able to share your practice with your family, and have they been receptive to that?
Yeah. I mean, for the longest time, my mother was not receptive to it. My father is definitely not receptive to it. But my mother, and my siblings, I wanted them to do this thing and I thought it would be helpful. When I moved to New York for a little while, my brother was living in New York, and he started to do yoga with me there. And that was a really hard opening experience for him. Um, I don't know how comfortable he would be of me sharing this, but you know, my brother, it's not easy for him to cry, and express himself and his emotions. And in a yoga class, we were doing this heart opening practice, and heart openers work with the lungs and the heart, the physical heart, and so which are areas, organs that carry the feeling of joy, and its opposite, they hold grief. And so I was talking about that during the class, and my brother had an emotional breakthrough, and he started crying. Um, and so yeah, I think that has been really impactful for him. Like, and he's continued in a variety of ways through the years. My mother actually started to practice yoga with me a few years back. And she's also been working with a yoga teacher in India. And she has gotten really into yoga in the past 5 years. It's become a huge part of her life. And
Wow.
it's like changing her life in the most positive ways. And yeah, I mean, one of the most incredible things she has ever said to me is like how thankful she is that I introduced her to yoga and how much it's changed her life. And um, it's kind of incredible. And she's like, every time I meditate, you pop up in my mind, it's like, woo, it's amazing that I could.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And she takes my class every week. She's here at the studio every Thursday.
Oh,
She
yeah.
makes an hour-long drive to be here. And I'm
Wow.
so proud of her for making that commitment.
Wow.
Yeah. So
So
that's been great.
It sounds like yoga has really just impacted your life and your family's life. And it kind of sounds like to me you were the black sheep of your family, like in a way of you went on this journey of like, let's look at the trauma, like let's look inward and really figure this out through the practice of yoga and through your other mindfulness practices, and now have like brought this back to your family or the ones willing, you know, and are, you know, having transformation happen, which is not easy to do. And it's incredibly powerful. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. It has been a really amazing experience to share this thing with my parent or my mother and my brother, and, you know, see in ways that it's been useful for them.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Can we talk a little bit about how yoga, your love for yoga, like kind of translated into the Dharma Project?
Yeah, sure. So, the Dharma Project is a nonprofit organization I started in 2016 that brings mindfulness and yoga to people that experience high levels of stress or complex trauma. Um, and I started it in 2016. I was running a yoga studio, and I had been running a yoga studio for a few years. And I I think I was, part of it is that like I was now in the business of yoga, and something about now having a physical space um, really solidified that for me, like this sense of what is my role in this larger culture of yoga? And am I enhancing it? Am I diminishing it? And I think one of the things I realized is that, we're all given a template like yoga, the how to become successful as a yoga studio owner. There's this like it was a laid out path. Everybody was kind of following a very similar template of how to run the business, and what I was seeing going on in the culture was that like a lot of people didn't actually feel like yoga was for them. And this was 2016, before that, even maybe early, uh, 2012, that time. And there were, whether it was men that didn't do yoga, like what you see in the classroom is like this homogeny in a way. You see like athletic, predominantly white, affluent women doing yoga. So men, different people of different body sizes, different abilities, different people of color. Like there's just so many people that weren't involved in this practice, And for me, there was this moment where I was like, well, just from my own experience of not feeling like yoga was for me, I wondered how many other people felt that way. And also from my experience of like navigating so many mental health challenges with this practice and how beneficial I found that to be, I just started to feel like, we're really leaving out a lot of people. And how did that happen? Like, what is it about the way that yoga is marketed? Um, what is it about the way that we're all running the business of it that is excluding people? It's unconscious. Nobody's trying to do that, but that's kind of what had happened.
Really?
Um, and so Dharma Project was really that came out of that frustration of like, am I a part of the problem? Like, am I perpetuating these narratives around who does yoga and what kind of like how affluent you have to be, or how, uh, you know, how am I participating in that in any way? And that became the big question for me. I didn't think I was going to start it as a nonprofit. I just thought I had these ideas of the ways that I could expose the people to yoga, to maybe also, I was teaching teachers at the time. I was doing certification programs. So I thought, oh, I could be very intentional about who goes through the training and see if I can shift what leadership looks like in my small community, so that we start to see more men and more people of color that were teaching yoga. And if we see leadership, then we're more likely to lean into something, that we see ourselves in. And so that was the thought, that if I could make, some contribution in shifting that and teaching people to teach yoga that looked more like the people that are in our city um, in a more holistic way, then let's see. And that's how Dharma Project started. And we went on to do some really amazing work. I taught in prisons and um, in schools and refugee communities, like a lot of different spaces where whether it's oppression or systemic inequities, like cause trauma or create trauma. Um, so we were working in spaces that there was a lot of trauma and using this as a tool for supporting people and navigating that trauma.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I attended one of the fundraisers
Mm-hmm.
a few years ago, and it was called I Am the Hope, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was so many testimonies from particularly men whose lives have been impacted through yoga and through the Dharma Project and like the work that the organization was doing. So I know that it's been doing some pretty incredible work in the community. Can I ask you why you chose the name Dharma?
Yeah. Dharma means purpose. I mean, there's a lot of different translations to it. In Hinduism, it's duty. In yoga, we say it's purpose. And there's this, there's this philosophy. It's called Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, and it's Dharma, which means purpose. Artha, which means the acquisition of material things. Kama is the experience of pleasure, and Moksha is the pursuit of spirituality. And so like, these are the different purposes of life. And Dharma is the umbrella. And what that means is like what your purpose is, understanding your purpose, discovering, exploring, and ultimately embodying and fulfilling your purpose. Um, that is the most important pursuit in life because everything else you do is informed by that understanding of yourself and what your purpose is. So what that means is like even the amount of material acquisition or how much you pursue wealth or material things is really contingent on what are you here to do. Uh, the amount of pleasure you experience is contingent on what is your purpose. Even the amount of spiritual pursuit is dependent on what is my purpose. So yoga is this journey of understanding yourself and understanding what is your contribution so that you're evolving individually, but also your individual evolution contributes to the greater evolution of consciousness. So that's the sort of personal responsibility that's also the collective responsibility. And so Dharma to me, it's practicing with purpose. It's a very intentional way of using even yoga. Like, how does this practice have purpose to it? And that purpose for me in that moment was to make sure that everybody felt like it was for them, and that they could benefit from it.
The concept kind of reminds me of I don't know if you've ever heard the word ikigai. Like
Yeah.
it's a Japanese phrase where it's like how do you live a fulfilling life? And it's the intersection of finding your purpose, your passion, and what you can do to create wealth and how you can give back to your community. And like the
Mm.
intersection of that point is how you can live a long and fulfilling life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, service is a component of it.
Mhm.
And I think that's like, so from my own experience, so true that like, being of service to others has been like the most heart expanding. I feel like guilty sometimes. I'm like, I'm getting so much out of this. uh, it's wild. I never thought that in the pursuit of serving someone else and thinking that I was helping someone else, like I actually was benefiting the most.
Cool.
It was bringing so much joy and uh, just affirmation into my life.
So you're going through a pretty big transition.
Yes.
having spent the last 8 years leading the Dharma Project, and I know it's been such a huge component of your life. Can you share a little bit about what went into the decision to transition out and step down? Because I know that that's not an easy decision to make.
Yeah, it was not easy. And I actually officially stepped down. August was really my last month. So it's been pretty recent. It's only been a couple of months since I've not been running the organization. And so I'm in a, very raw transitional period right now. Um, last year, 2023, actually, was when you came to that fundraiser in the fall. And it was the first time we did a fundraiser. And yes, starting this thing, getting it to a place where it was sustainable. In the South, yoga is still not valued, like in the sector, like when it comes to government sectors, nonprofit, that sector, like science is slowly catching up, like now understanding, like we have now the data to demonstrate that yoga is a powerful tool for navigating and healing trauma. We understand that now. And like many states in the US have embraced it as this science-based practice. But in the South, I felt like I was swimming upstream. Like I felt like I was having to constantly pitch and sell and convince people of the value that this practice had in these different spaces, like in refugee communities or in prisons or with police officers I worked with for a while, or in education with young children. So there was a lot of hard work that went into even making the case for this thing, and the reason why I had to make a case is because nonprofits depend on funding from these different institutions from different sectors, whether it's the government or these foundations. I had a local community that was supporting the work and would do fundraisers, and they knew because they had been doing the yoga. They understood that it was changing their life. And so they were like, yes, it was easy to get support from them. But when it came to like now the larger community needs to also support this. As we were growing, we needed the support and funding from foundations and from grants. And so it took a lot of work to make that case. And that's actually one of the things I'm most proud of is Dharma Project did become one of the first yoga-based nonprofits to receive substantial funding from the nonprofit sector, from different foundations. And so we really opened a pathway for other organizations to also receive that support. And we're seeing that now more and more nonprofits are starting. I mean, when I started, there were maybe 3, yoga nonprofits, and none of us were receiving funding in that way. And Dharma Project really made some amazing strides for that. So yeah, it took me hard work, blood, sweat, and tears went in this. For several years, I was working like 40 hours and it was not a paycheck, like it was a lot of a labor of love. And then on top of that, I was going into precincts talking to 70 police officers about why they should do yoga. I was going into prisons, working with men, like 25, 30 men teaching yoga. Very intimidating environments. So like on an emotional, mental, physical level, like I had to really just navigate new spaces and like confront just the inadequacies and fear of and nervousness and of like speaking and like sharing this thing with like a lot of like opposition, or a lot of resistance. So I just feel like it was a lot. That's what I'm trying to say. It was a lot of work. It was hard work. I'm really By the time we did our first fundraiser last year, it was such an amazing, beautiful experience to have so many stakeholders in this one space together, basically just like pouring and expressing our love for this organization. It was an amazing experience. And I think after that fundraiser, it was like a light bulb. It was just such a beautiful moment where I just was like, I am done. I have done the work I'm supposed to do, and I've made the contribution I was supposed to make. And this no longer is my purpose, you know? And it was that simple and easy. And I like feel so like proud of myself for having that moment of clarity. It didn't take a lot of I'm sure there were moments throughout where I was like doubting and unsure and wondering if so that was always going on, processing, but it just felt like a spark, you know? It felt like when it was right, I just knew and I didn't think too much on it. I made the decision and I moved forward. And I love that. I love that it didn't take me like getting burnt out, to finally realize that this was no longer my path. It didn't get to an unhealthy place. It just came to a place where I felt complete in the work I've done. And I just knew that I was ready for my next chapter. And that this organization also was ready for its next chapter. We had finally, after 8 years, it was now like this period of scale that like I wasn't interested in anymore. Like I was really excited about the starting of this thing, getting it to a place of being sustained, making the case for it in the community. I loved it. I loved all of that. It was such a creative experience. Now this stage of like, all right, how are we going to keep this thing growing and sustained financially? That wasn't interesting to me anymore. The work is always interesting. And the hardest part of leaving was the fact that I would no longer be serving. Particularly, I was teaching yoga certification programs in a couple of prisons, and I developed such deep relationships with some of the individuals that were going through our program. And that bond and that connection and that feeling of like sharing something that was meaningful for them was awesome. And I was really struggling with how to leave that. But I knew that if I left the organization, I wanted to leave it in its completely, not like still participate in certain ways. I needed to completely step away.
Well,
And then I also had other pursuits that I was interested in, like in my own self, my own creative pursuits that I couldn't do because Dharma Project required all of me. Like, even my studio, like I have stopped having a yoga studio. I started just renting out my space to other people and was essentially a landlord and was teaching a couple of classes. I just couldn't put any energy into other things. Like Dharma Project just required a lot. And I was ready for other things that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not an easy decision to make. And I feel like it takes a lot of self-awareness and intentionality, even in the transitions. And I'm glad that everything has transitioned smoothly. It's just not easy. And I feel like a lot of founders and CEOs and people who start organizations that grow into taking on a life of its own will have to face this decision at some point or another. So I'm glad that you recognize that and you were able to step into whatever's next for you.
Yeah, thank you. It isn't. And I've watched many founders stay too long, get burnt out. The organization suffers, they suffer, like there's a lot of evidence of that. So I was really lucky to have that self-awareness or whatever it was that allowed me to make the decision when I did, to feel like I was doing it in a healthy way. And I'm not saying that the transition wasn't difficult at times. And I certainly had moments that I was attached and clinging or disappointed or like afraid of the next person and how they would manage it. And so all those things were going on for me, but at least I knew no matter what, I wasn't, this was no longer what I needed to do.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of mixed emotions transitioning out of something that was such a big part of your life into not having that in your life.
Yeah, it's been surprisingly challenging. I mean, I guess I should have known it would be, but I I think because Dharma Project was a part of my life and consuming for 8 years, not having it was very like shocking, like all of a sudden I have all this time. I was used to giving sometimes 60 plus hours a week
Wow.
to this organization. All of a sudden I was like, I have so much space. And I've been really watching myself, how I'm filling that space. And the other thing is like, I wanted the space. That was actually the word for the year is space. Like, because my time was always so occupied and had so many commitments, um, I was missing that feeling of just like spreading out my arms and like having spaciousness and having nothing to do, which is hard for me. I tend to become very consumed with work, and maybe even there is a little bit of workaholism there, where work is something that I use to, in some ways, maybe not deal with other things that are going on in my life. It consumes me. So having just like a period where I was letting myself be bored, you know, uh, is really important. And I wanted that. Like, I went into this with like, okay, don't make any decisions or commitments. Don't say yes, even to meetings. I mean, I had people asking if they could meet for coffee and talk about nonprofits. Like, no, like I don't want, or ask to collaborate or all this stuff. I was like, I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to take a meeting. Um, so it was like very intentional that I was not making any commitments. I haven't made any commitments for a couple months, and that I just allowed myself to sit with the feelings that are coming up. And there are a lot of feelings, because the last thing I want to do is default to the things that I'm really comfortable doing. And yoga is that thing, actually, because I've been doing it for so long, and I have such a deep commitment to it. I think I'm pretty good at what I do. It's like this very reliable part of my life. It's always there for me. It will always be there for me. Like, that's the beautiful thing. There's this knowing I'm always going to do this practice, and it's taking care of me, and I love teaching, and it's something I can always do and like make a living doing. And I'll always teach to some capacity. I'm currently teaching. I teach a few classes, but I could easily teach more classes and like go back to doing just that and making a living doing that. But this period of my life is actually about, I want to be uncomfortable. I want to step into things that I love, that I am afraid of. And it's not necessarily about making money doing it, but actually putting more of myself and my time and my energy into sharing myself in ways that I yearn to share, that I'm afraid to share. The vulnerability that it requires to put yourself out there creatively, to be honest in the world with your creative outlet. That's what I'm seeking. So I'm just, I'm just letting myself be really uncomfortable right now. Sitting with it, feeling extremely inadequate and insecure at times about what I'm doing with myself and how I'm going to make it all work,
I feel like it's so hard to go from like 60-hour weeks, or where just your work is everything that you're living, breathing, eating, and then to doing absolutely nothing. And I think it's so easy to just fill that time with things, especially because that's the habit and that's what feels familiar. So I think what you're doing is really hard.
It is. I mean, I have to, Grace, I'm like checking and rechecking. Like I've like taken apart shelves. I've built other things. I've taken a cabinet. I'm doing all these construction tasks right now, like building things and like, I'm really having to like look at myself right now. I love doing that kind of stuff, but I'm also seeing that like, am I distracting myself with this? Am I trying to fill up space? Like, um, what am I doing, with this, with these activities, whatever it is? I have to keep asking myself those questions because it is when the tendency is to work, and like use that as your numbing, your addiction, to not do it is really hard, but that's what I'm trying to confront is what am I avoiding by filling the space with work? And yoga is the thing I fill my life with, fill space with, because it's easy for me to do that. I'm successful at it, and success, whatever that means, but I feel very successful at teaching yoga, living this practice. I feel like it's default, comfortable, We haven't really talked about the girl with the tattoo, but that's, this 2024 was also an opportunity to work on a really wonderful project. The feeling that I got working on the girl with the tattoo, it was the catalyst for a lot of the changes I've made this past year in my life. It's the thing that's bringing so much joy, and it's the thing that's challenging me and terrifying me. And so I'm just wanting to lean into that because those are the feelings I want to feel. Feeling fear is like one of the most positive things to move towards. Like I'm learning that about myself. Not danger.
We're not saying run towards danger. Just gotta make that clear.
But the fear, that the things that have brought me the most fear tend to be the things that like are also what open my heart the most, and what give me feelings of fulfillment, and purpose. I have found that to be the case. Like in all of my endeavors, I've started those things because I was challenged by something. I was afraid of it. I had to learn new ways of navigating work, or business, or navigating my brain. Like my brain had to work in new ways. And so I've just found that if I'm feeling fear about doing something, then that's usually a sign that that's the direction to go, to walk into it, to lean into it. It's never easy to do, but at least I know that at this point about myself, that, ooh, that feeling, I know that feeling, and go towards that. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's really powerful advice and not easy to do. Like not
No,
easy to do at all.
it isn't.
You touched a little bit on the girl with the tattoo. Can you tell us a little bit about the short film, The Girl with the Tattoo? I had the privilege of being able to work with you and your brother on this project. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what the film was about? And you mentioned that it was a very pivotal project for you in this
Mm-hmm.
decision, in this transition, and for you to get to this point where you're at now. So I would love to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So my brother, during the pandemic, he wrote a short film. One day we were sitting at my parents' house. We were sitting on the couch, and my brother just like shared this hilarious skit he wanted to do. And so he wrote it. Like he told us one day, I think 2 days later, he wrote it. It was less than 10 minutes. And then literally like 2 weeks later, we made it. And it was basically this film about a short film. It's called Runs, in the Family. And it was about just this, like the tension in the family and the way that like something small, like flatulence in this case, just brings out all of these other things, Um, And so anyway, from that, my brother then, it was so well received that he wrote a full feature and also an episodic called Nusha. And it was taking the characters, these different family members, and like kind of expanding on their life, and their stories. And so one of the stories is this character. It went from this moment in our family life to this fictional story that had truths of our own personalities and our family dynamics, but also very fictionalized. So this one character, which is based off of me, her name was Nalini, and she is a yoga teacher in Atlanta. She owns a studio, and she's grappling with just the commercialization of this deep and rich art and science of yoga that she's been teaching. She wants to be honest and authentic and rooted in lineage in the sharing of yoga, but is also struggling to keep her business afloat in a culture where yoga is commodified and what are they called, the uh, influencers, run like the narrative of what yoga is and who does it. And so she's just kind of struggling, and it just takes a very dark turn.
Mm-hmm.
And she loses her mind. And it's fun. And, of course, extremely removed from who I am as a person and how I approach yoga, but such a fun way to express some feelings I have about how yoga can become appropriated and commodified, and how it's been challenging sometimes to feel like I have a place in the culture of yoga, or how to maintain integrity and authenticity and stay rooted in yoga as this very deep practice from India that should be respected and honored and taught in a way that is elevating it. And sometimes it feels like what I see happening with yoga, it's diminishing it sometimes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Would you say that while you were playing the role of Nalini, that, like, how much were the lines blurred between who you are, Rutu, and then versus what Nalini?
No, I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, she's, like I don't have, this is my brother's lens, right? He
Mm.
wrote this story. So Nalini is a character from his creative mind. And though, it's informed by his sister that has run a studio and has had challenges with her own identity in place in the culture of yoga. So there's that, of course. Um, but Nalini has just a very different way of navigating it. Like, you know, her relationship to smoking weed and her, violent tendencies and all of that. And not to say that like it wasn't satisfying and cathartic to
Mm.
do those things. I felt like I got to express something that I would never actually express, in that way. I was nervous about like, how are people going to receive this? Like, are they going to think that this is how I feel and then I want to go around stabbing people or, you know, do they think that that's me? Like,
Spoiler alert.
sorry, I'm probably, but so I definitely struggled with that. And, I spoke to my brother about that and like making sure we create some separation, because it is also my work and my identity in a lot of ways. And I didn't want people to feel a certain way about that. Then I realized, like, first of all, how people receive you and what they think of you is not in your control, no matter what. So I really had to let that go. And the people that know me and work with me and have been involved in my teaching and practice, they already know who I am. You know what I mean? So like I could relax and just enjoy making this piece of art with my brother. And I mean, it's his writing, his vision, his talent. Like, what an honor, for me to be able to have a role in something he's created. Um, so yeah, it was a great process for me to let go of worries or, again, it's this idea that like as an artist, you're like, how are people going to receive what I put out, and like afraid and uncomfortable and worried that it's not going to be received well. And that's a wonderful thing for an artist to have to work through and to surrender. It's so freeing. And I hope I have more opportunities to do that, to struggle and have tension with sharing something, sharing myself. I'm looking forward to that. I want more of that feeling and make that become something, a practice that I'm sharpening, of like not caring what people think and putting it out there anyway.
Yeah. It sounds like everything's kind of aligning on this path for you of like you're seeking out being uncomfortable and just walking towards what you fear and exploring these new sides of yourself in this transition. I'm excited to see what that journey is going to look like and how that unfolds for you. I'm sure whatever endeavor you do next is going to be amazing, considering just how much inner work you're doing and how intentional you're being with everything and how you're being so intentional with where you're spending your time. And yeah.
Thanks, Grace. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for saying that. I feel that way too. I feel like whatever I'm going to do is going to be great because I've been lucky enough to do things that I love doing. Like most of my adult life, I have been doing creative work and like working for myself. And uh, it's not been easy, but I feel like I've had the privilege of loving my work
Yeah.
all this time, and pivoting when I'm done, when I feel like it's no longer the work.
I know you say you've been lucky enough to go down this path, but I also think it's more than luck. It's this being intentional about your work being something meaningful and pursuing, like, because it's not an easy path.
It's not. No, I mean, that is not the luck, and the privilege is not to take away from the hard work and the sacrifice. That is very important to like choosing your path in that way, doing your art, pursuing purpose, like all that. There's a lot of sacrifice involved. Like I cannot even, the amount of the amount of sacrifices I have made, it's pretty tremendous, to be able to have this life. So yes, I'm lucky as hell. I'm so privileged, and I have been extremely intentional and willing to make the sacrifices and willing to delay gratification to be here.
What would you say is your biggest win of this past year? Well, I guess when our viewers are listening to this, it
will be in the new year. Yeah. Well, the biggest win of 2024, for me, I've already said it, but it holds true. Making the decision to step away from Dharma Project is my biggest win. It's actually, I feel so proud of myself, and that's not easy for me to say. I'm like a very like critical person of myself. It's rare that I'm like, good job, Rutu. It's just not my nature to like praise myself or even feel proud. So the fact that I feel that way, like, and it's so easy for me to say, I am so proud of myself for making that decision. It's like one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. Like that's how I feel about it. Yeah, I think that's the biggest win, is to have the clarity, the self-awareness, and the courage to make a change, make this change, to leave something I started to feel like I was going to be disappointing a lot of people, to do it anyway,
Yeah.
That's been my greatest win. And I can't wait for what the result of that will be. Like, I'm so excited. about this next chapter, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big win, I'll say.
Yeah. It's a huge win. It's easy to stay in things that are comfortable and working,
Yeah.
you know? And like everything around you is giving you validation of the work you're doing, you know, of the good work you're doing. Like, I feel like even my mom at one point, she was like, you're finally successful at it. Like, you just got to this place where the money is starting to work, the, you know, the public recognition and success is starting to happen. Like, it just happened and you're leaving it now. She just was kind of dumbfounded by my decision. She was shocked that I was doing that because everything looked like I was headed to like really taking this thing to another level, you know? Um, so she was shocked, and everything around me was definitely you know, affirming what I was doing. So to have this big shift happen, uh, it was, yeah, it was just a big deal, you know,
Yeah.
to make the
And
decision when I did. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it shows that you're really trusting in yourself and in your intuition, which
Well,
I
I
think
think
is
that's
really
why I'm so
powerful.
proud. Like, I
Yeah.
think that's why I feel so proud of myself, because I've made changes in my, you know, like with the studio and even how I managed and who I managed. Like, there's always been changes and pivots and things like that. But a lot of those things happened from a place of like upset or, you know, burning bridges, things like that. Like, there was just a lot of like tension in those decisions. So I think the reason why it feels so good right now is that, again, even though Dharma Project's transition wasn't flawless or seamless, I felt so good. And like, I felt like it was such a right decision. I felt like so healthy and clear in the making of that. So yeah, I'm just like, oh, like trust that I'm feeling towards myself. Like, I mean, this is kind of what we're talking about. This whole conversation has been like, how did you get to this practice? You know, how did you get to this thing that has allowed you to overcome so many of the obstacles that I had to start with, and like, like find home and place in my own self, you know? And like, so this is kind of one of those marker moments of my life where I'm like, oh, all of this hard work and like all of this yoga and all of this self reflection and self work, this is what it's about. Like, to just feel like you can trust yourself, and that, um, and whatever it is your intuition is saying to do, like say yes to it, you know, like go into it. And that is, to actually do that and to feel so good about my decision and to not feel like I left something burning, you know, behind me, and
Yeah.
all of that, it just feels really good. Mhm.
Well, that kind of leads me to my next question, which was going to be, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received? And
Mm.
I'm curious if it has something to do with intuition or trusting yourself.
And maybe in some way, but I think one of the best things that has stuck with me through the years is something actually my mother said to me. I had called my mom one day because it was actually while I was running the Dharma Project. I had, you know, we had gotten a big grant. And it was the first time we had gotten a really big grant, you know. And so I called my mom. She's the first person I called to tell her. And I was so excited. And I was just like elated, you know, and I was sharing this. And my mom's reaction was like, beta, which is an endearing word for daughter, or my child. She's like, beta, be humble, you know? And I was like, what? I was like, first of all, I'm not being egotistical right here. Okay. I'm just like enjoying the fact that I won, like I had a win in life, you know? Like, can I have this, or can I have this moment, you know? So I had a moment. I was kind of annoyed by her reaction, but like it stuck with me. And I think what she was essentially expressing is to not allow anything in life to get you too high, or anything in life to get you too down, too low. That like just this steadiness of emotion or regulation of emotion or humility, of just like, I think there's something about that I really appreciate because life is full of these ups and downs and like these waves of emotions, and like to get caught in any direction of those is what creates suffering, because the higher up I am, the harder the fall is, which is inevitable. And so I think what she was really expressing is just like this evenness, that everything that you gain and everything that you lose, like they're two sides of the same coin, and the more you can receive them with equanimity and ease, the less pain you'll feel. Yeah, I think that's been one of my greatest, and I think I have an evenness. Like sometimes I wish I would get more excited or receive compliments more, but I think I've just become so like steady in terms of like, okay, I did that, cool. What's next? Or I don't know if that necessarily works in the direction of when I'm down, but yeah, I do appreciate this sense of a neither here nor there, just let it all like be peaceful, in the receiving of all the things that happen to you.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to ask if you could share how our viewers could get in touch with you, follow your work, follow the Dharma Project or All Life is Yoga.
alllifeisyoga.com is the website. info@alllifeisyoga.com is the email address to get in touch. I have a few social media handles. Facebook, my name, Rutu Chaudhuri. Instagram, my personal Instagram handle is Hunter Valley, HUNTERVALI. And then All Life is Yoga is also the other handle. So those are all the different ways that anyone can get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from anyone.
Well, we're excited to keep up with your journey. I can't wait to see what this next chapter is going to look like for you.
Thank you. And Grace and Liz, I love what you guys are up to, and I love this podcast, and I really appreciate that you wanted to even considered having me on here.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. To learn more about today's guests and find related links and resources, visit the episode page at nexusexperience.com. You'll also find our full podcast archive. If you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review letting us know. Sharing the show with your friends is also incredibly helpful. You can find us at Inside Coffee Break on socials. For updates, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. Today's show was edited by our co-host Grace Chung. We appreciate your love and support. See you in the next episode.